eyes in the shadow of the Silver Bridge. Night gathers thick along the banks of the Ohio River, pooling in the forgotten hollows of West Virginia like ink poured from a shattered well. In the small town of Point Pleasant, whispers once crept beneath porch lights and through half-drawn curtains. Whispers of a towering figure with burning red eyes, wings wide enough to blot out a harvest moon. For 13 unsettled months between 1966 and 1967, ordinary people, teachers, soldiers, young sweethearts, swore they saw that impossible silhouette perched on rusted girders or gliding over lonely backroads. Most expected the visions to fade with daylight, but the darkness only deepened, climaxing in the roar of snapping steel. On the frozen evening, the Silver Bridge collapsed. Tonight, we return to those desperate hours. Listen closely. The wind still remembers every heartbeat of panic, every unanswered phone call, every splash of river water swallowing a final scream. Walk with me, candle in hand, and tread carefully, because once you feel those scarlet eyes upon your back, the night never lets you forget. Chapter 1. The First Flight. Linda Huey always told herself night drives were therapy. With the warm hum of her '57 Chevy and the rolling Appalachian backroads stretching like black ribbon ahead, she could almost peel away the long factory shifts and the small-town gossip that clung like coal dust. But on this damp November Friday, Point Pleasant felt different. The air carried a metallic chill that stung her lungs, and every distant porch light trembled behind a veil of mist wafting off the Ohio River. She flicked the radio dial, hunting for a station that wasn't crackling. Snatches of Hank Williams flickered in and out. "I'm so lonesome I could cry," then dissolved into static. The interference seemed to thicken the silence rather than break it, so she rolled her window halfway, hoping real night sounds would soothe the static in her mind. Instead, the wind smelled of something acrid, like old fireworks left too long in a damp shed. 5 miles north of town, the road passed the World War II munitions site everyone simply called the TNT area. Concrete igloos, storage bunkers, hunched beneath ragged cedar and sumac. Even by day, they looked like half-buried giant skulls. By night, they became hollow eye sockets where shadows bred. Teenagers parked there after football games, daring each other to sprint inside the dark domes. Linda had never been brave or foolish enough to join them. Yet the moment those bunkers slid into her headlights, she eased off the gas. Compelled by a prickle on her skin, she chalked up to caffeine and exhaustion. Something rustled in the tree line. She whispered, probably a deer, yet her pulse tapped faster. Headlights washed over the nearest bunker. Its curved entrance dripped with algae like a gigantic green-lipped mouth. That's when she saw the eyes. 2 red embers glared down from the bunker roof, high enough to clear the treetops. They weren't the glassy gleam of raccoon eyeshine. These orbs burned from within, steady and self-lit, as if a furnace smoldered behind them. She froze, foot poised above the brake. The embers blinked or maybe narrowed, shifting from curious to intent. Moonlight sketched a silhouette around them, a head, no neck, a body tapered like a swimmer's down to elongated legs, and behind it, wings. Enormous membranous wings unfurled in slow motion, ash-gray and veined like the underside of a giant moth. The creature crouched, muscles gathering, and launched. Wind slammed Linda's windshield. Instinct took over. She stamped the accelerator. Gravel spat under spinning tires and the Chevy fishtailed onto the narrow asphalt of Route 62. Her heart punched her ribs. She risked a glance in the rearview mirror and nearly wished she hadn't. The thing was airborne, gliding low, its wings barely pumping, as though gravity's rules were favors it could accept or dismiss at will. The distance between them shrank. 70 miles an hour on that twisting road felt like skating on a razor. Branches flashed by, skeletal and leafless, clawing at the moonlit haze. The creature's eyes stayed fixed in the mirror, closer, closer, until they filled the glass like twin signal flares. She could make out the texture of its skin, not feathers, but a mottled hide resembling smoke-stained marble. The wings edged forward, slicing the night, taloned feet stretched, probing for landing. A horn blared ahead. Headlights burst over a rise, a pickup truck barreling the opposite direction. Linda jerked right, tires skimming loose gravel on the shoulder. The winged shape veered up and over her roof in an impossible silent arc. For a breathless second, it hovered directly above the Chevy, blotting out the moon. Then it peeled off toward the river, vanishing beyond the tree line as though stitched into the darkness itself. Linda didn't ease off the gas until the reassuring glow of downtown's single traffic light bled into the gloom. She screeched to a halt outside the police station, engine ticking angrily. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed as she stumbled to the desk. Words fell out in jagged bursts, eyes red as road flares, wings wider than the car. It chased me half the highway. Officer Roger Lanier steadied her trembling hands around a chipped mug of coffee, while Deputy Miller listened, stone-faced. Lanier traded a look with Miller. "That's the fourth report tonight," he murmured. 2 teenage couples, familiar mischief makers, had skidded into the station earlier, swearing a man-sized bat had stalked them from the same munitions maze. The deputies had muttered about moonshine and Halloween leftovers. But Linda's panic wasn't theatrical. It felt lived in, raw. While Miller organized a patrol to sweep the TNT grounds, Linda collapsed onto a bench in the corridor. The scuffed linoleum seemed to ripple beneath her, as if her brain had lost trust in her eyes. She clutched the mug, knuckles whitening, and thought of her grandmother's Appalachian folktales. Owl women, coal mine ghosts, creatures drawn to tragedy like vultures. She'd laughed them off for years. Now the laughter dried, replaced by a cold certainty. The stories were awake, wearing new names. Midnight crept closer. The front door squealed open again, letting in a gust of river fog and an elderly angler in rubber hip waders. He spoke quietly, like a man keeping secrets from the wind. "Was out on the south bank near 2ND Way Park," he said, eyes glassy with shock. "Something huge flew over the water, wings dark against the moon, eyes red as brake lights. Thought you folks ought to know." Lanier's jaw tightened. He ushered the fisherman to a chair beside Linda. 2 strangers sharing silence, linked by terror neither could explain. Outside, squad cars prowled toward the abandoned wartime labyrinth. Their searchlights swept treetops and bunker mouths, catching only swirling fog. Yet more than one officer reported radios crackling with bursts of static so violent the headsets popped. Down by the river, dogs howled at nothing visible, and seasoned hunters later swore deer bolted en masse toward higher ground, as if fleeing an oncoming storm no barometer could feel. Inside the station, Linda raised her eyes to the cracked ceiling tiles and whispered a prayer she half remembered from childhood. Part plea, part apology, it dissolved into a single thought that burrowed deep. Whatever's out there is watching us. The room seemed to breathe in response, as though walls and windows needed no lungs to draw the same icy air. When Deputy Miller returned near dawn, uniform damp with half-frozen dew, he could offer nothing but a slow shake of his head. No footprints, no feathers, no scorch marks on bunker roofs. Only the memory of a night that felt wrong down to the marrow. Linda realized evidence was not required for belief. Sometimes terror itself was the proof. That morning the sky blushed pale over Point Pleasant, innocent as any small town waking to church bells and coffee aroma. Yet those who knew the river fog carried eyes would never look at sunrise the same way. For in the hush between night and day, Linda and a handful of others had glimpsed a truth crouched beyond the veil of reason. A truth with wings wide enough to shadow an entire valley. And somewhere along the dismantled catwalks of the Silver Bridge, rivets sighed in the cold, dreaming of the weight they would soon bear. Chapter 2. Red eyes over Main Street. Fog lingered along the Ohio River like a stubborn ghost. The week that Point Pleasant awoke to headlines it never imagined seeing outside pulp tabloids. Winged creature stalks TNT area. Locals terrified, blared the front page of the Point Pleasant Register on November 16, 1966. Editor Mary Heyer, a brisk woman who chain-sipped black coffee and rarely indulged rumor, had spent the previous night in her cramped office, telephone pressed to her ear while witness after witness poured out versions of the same nightmare. By dawn, she no longer doubted. Something uncanny had flown beneath the vault of Appalachian stars, and the town was now its roost. The chatter swelled first in barbershops, then in the aisles of Lowe's grocery, and finally at the pew-packed Wednesday prayer meeting. Jars clinked in jelly cupboards when housewives gasped at each new account. A hunter rattled by a thunderous whoosh overhead, children spotting scarlet orbs peering through their bedroom window. A milkman whose horse refused to cross the 2ND-way bridge before sunrise. That Friday evening, a patrol car idled at the four-way stop downtown, while Officer Roger Lanier refilled his thermos with diner coffee. Steam spiraled upward, but his breath felt colder than the November air. A low hum thrummed through his cruiser's radio, static again, followed by a burst of garbled voices from deputies combing the TNT maze. Lanier thumbed the mic. "Say again, Bravo 2? Crackle, no reply. He flicked his gaze to Main Street's iron lampposts, where wreaths already hung for Christmas. Traffic was sparse, just a battered Studebaker rolling toward the river. Then, without warning, the lamps dimmed. Not blinked, dimmed, as if an unseen hand throttled the current. In that instant, a presence pressed down upon the street, heavy as a storm front. Above the courthouse roof, a silhouette erupted against the clouds, wings spanning the width of a boxcar, body dark as wet slate. The creature banked once, gliding low over the marquee of the State Theater. Neon flickered as its eyes cast crimson reflections across the display glass of Wheeler's Hardware. Lanier slammed the cruiser door and stepped onto the pavement, heart piston pounding. The town stood frozen, diners clutching pie forks mid-bite inside Jimbo's cafe, shoppers rooted between shelves of tinsel and nutmeg. Even the Studebaker stalled. The driver stared upward, jaw slack, too stunned to turn the key. As the being coasted above 4th Street, it let out a noise nothing born of feathers should voice, half whistle, half shriek, modulating like metal under stress. Windows rattled, a stray dog tucked tail and bolted. Lanier forced his legs to move and drew his service revolver. Not out of hope he could fell it, but out of duty to look braver than he felt. The creature passed directly over the intersection of Main and Viand. For one surreal heartbeat, driver and beast locked eyes. Later, the driver, Nancy Kincaid, a school librarian, would recall those eyes as deep, searching lights that stared through my skin and into every memory of fear I ever had. When the monster tilted its head, sunlight from the courthouse clock tower glinted off the curve of its wing membranes, revealing veins like molten lead. Then, with a spurting jolt, the street lamps regained full brightness. Car engines sputtered back to life. The shadow lifted toward the river gorge, folding into fog until only the echo of wings remained. Words sprinted ahead of logic. By midnight, amateur monster hunters packed shotguns into pickups and barreled north. Flashlights bobbed through the munitions site like errant fireflies. In town, Mary Heyer cranked her typesetter and hammered out a fresh headline. Red-eyed phantom sweeps over Main Street. She feared sensationalism, but accuracy demanded the stark truth. That same night, Linda Huey lay awake, listening to cicadas murmur against her window screen. Each chirp sounded like rasping breath. She pictured those glowing eyes in her rearview mirror and wondered how many times they had watched her before she finally noticed. A terrible new thought took root. If the creature hovered unseen for years, maybe it wasn't intruder, but sentinel, gazing upon Point Pleasant not as predator, but as omen. Across town, Reverend Charles McDaniel unlocked the small, white-steepled church and stepped inside to pray. He knelt before the empty altar, candlelight quivering. Visions flashed, wings eclipsing the moon, bridge cables groaning, waters roiling black beneath buckled steel. He pressed trembling fingers to his temple and whispered scripture to steady his pulse, yet no verse quelled the dread that the creature's appearance signaled something far worse than its own claws. Days blurred. Sightings multiplied. A teenage couple necking by Sand Hill Cemetery fled when wings blotted out the Milky Way above them. 2 firefighters reported a huge bird with red eyes roosting on a water tower rail. Livestock were found huddled, eyes wide, uninjured but shaking as though each heartbeat struck like a hammer. Electrical failures spiked. Radios snapped and popped. Televisions fizzed to static precisely when residents tried to tune evening news, as though the town itself conspired to muffle outside voices. On November 22nd, every streetlight from 6th Avenue to 5th shut off simultaneously at 9:11 p.m. City crews could find no blown fuses. The fear possessed a rhythm. Reports crescendoed at dusk, dipped toward dawn, swelled again the next darkening. Sheriff's deputies tracked calls on a wall map. Red pushpins clustered like measles around the TNT area and then crept toward downtown in an expanding spiral. Then the spiral reached the river. Fisherman Jake "Catfish" Ramsey had spent 30 winters casting nets under the Silver Bridge's blue trusses. On December 3rd, shortly after midnight, he throttled down his skiff near Pier 4 to bait trot lines. River mist hung thick, dome-shaped beneath each arch. As Jake stooped to slice a chunk of shad, ripples slapped hull planks, too loud, too deliberate to be cop. He straightened. Something vast broke the surface 20 yards off, not rising, but gliding just above the waterline. Twin red globes hovered a moment, painting ribbons of crimson across the black current. Jake dropped his knife. The thing lifted on 6-foot wings and vanished into bridge shadows. When he finally reached the docks, he swore off the river at night. More troubling, he claimed the creature wasn't alone. That just beyond the one he saw, heavier darkness shifted, suggesting multiple wings tucked into mist, waiting. Jake's account might have evaporated into rumor had a highway maintenance worker not phoned Mary Hire the next dawn. He too had glimpsed fleeting red eyes weaving among the bridge girders while de-icing cables. He could still see them when he blinked. After images, twin ferries carrying visions of disaster. Mary filled another notebook with frantic shorthand, yet questions outpaced ink. Why did electrical grids stutter when the creature appeared? Why did animals sense its presence minutes before people? Most haunting of all, why linger above the Silver Bridge? That question echoed in the minds of those entrusted with Point Pleasant's safety. City Council scheduled an emergency meeting. Half-joking banter about giant bird season died the moment Linda Huey shared her experience. Her honesty nullified humor. Tears rimmed her eyes, but her voice never cracked. In that packed chamber, she relived the chase, and grown men felt their knees weaken. Reverend McDaniel approached the podium next, recounting a dream so vivid it left a sketch of twisted girders on his notebook margin. "I fear," he said quietly, "our visitor is not creature, but harbinger." Silence expanded until Mayor Harry Crosby cleared his throat. He announced stricter curfews and nightly patrols of the bridge and TNT site. Yet law alone felt flimsy against something that ignored steel and logic alike. That night, wind battered shutters, sending loose nails clattering like claws along clapboard siding. Families huddled by living room radios, volume low, waiting. In some houses, dogs stared at empty corners and growled until owners dragged them beneath blankets. Over the courthouse, thick clouds masked the moon, but every so often a gap tore open and a sliver of pale light spilled across rooftops. enough for anxious eyes to search the sky for a flapping shadow. And somewhere beyond sight, a shape perched in stillness. It watched streetlights flicker, tracked the wanderings of deer in abandoned meadows, and listened to cables hum where metal met river. Perhaps it counted heartbeats, perhaps it measured time another way altogether. But when a bank clock downtown clicked from 11:59 to 12 AM, the eyes flared brighter, as though the creature anticipated the stroke of an unseen bell only it could hear. In homes and church basements across Point Pleasant, sleep refused to visit. The people sensed, without proof, without reasonable cause, that every red-eyed sighting stitched their town closer to a seam of impending calamity. And the Mothman, wings folded like curtains against night's stage, waited behind that seam with the calm of something that had witnessed catastrophe before. Chapter 3. Visitors in black coats. Snow threatened that first week of December, though the clouds above Point Pleasant looked more like bruises than winter lace. The town's children pressed faces to frosted classroom windows and prayed for flurries, but the sky withheld its promise. Instead of flakes, it delivered strangers. Mary Hire noticed them first. Just after dusk, a sleek black sedan coasted into the newspaper's gravel lot, its engine idling with a faint, expensive purr. Two men emerged, tall, lean, shoulders squared with military precision. Their coats were the color of soot after a house fire, immaculate even at the hems. They wore narrow ties and identical fedoras tilted low, shading pale faces. One carried a thin valise. The other slipped leather-gloved hands into his pockets. Mary felt the instinctive jolt of a reporter sensing story. She stepped outside, notebook ready. The taller man greeted her by name, though she'd never seen him. His accent was regionless, vowels clipped as if pared by a scalpel. He inquired about the alleged aerial phenomenon plaguing the area. Mary answered cautiously, describing witness reports. When she mentioned the creature's eyes, the man's lips tightened, almost a smile, but not quite. He requested her notes. Mary refused. The other man leaned forward, eyes blank as porcelain dolls, and asked if she ever worried the sensational might damage community morale. His voice, too, lacked inflection, as though borrowed from a recording with tonal range removed. Mary's pen trembled, yet she stood firm, quoting freedom of the press. After a long beat, the strangers nodded in unison, returned to their sedan, and slid away into the gloom without headlights. Within an hour, similar cars crept along country lanes. Farmers glimpsed black coats knocking on doors, flashing credentials too quickly to read, asking terse questions about red eyes, radio interference, bridge vibrations. Those who answered felt their memories blur, as if details dissolved the moment they were spoken. Word spread of men who moved like marionettes guided by unseen strings. Deputy Miller, patrolling the TNT area, caught taillights vanishing down an unmarked service road. He followed, tires crunching ice-filmed puddles, but the sedan dodged view around twisting bunkers. At a fork, Miller killed his engine and listened. Only the shrill winter wind replied, until a scream ripped across the concrete maze. It came from deep inside the igloos, a single ragged cry that cut off mid-breath. Miller shoved through underbrush, flashlight beam quivering across graffiti-scarred walls. He called out. Echoes answered, but no scream repeated. Then his radio crackled, high-pitched, metallic, not static this time, but a voice speaking words he couldn't parse, syllables reversed, as though the transmission played backward. The flashlight stuttered, dimmed, died. Darkness inhaled him, vast and thick. When the beam blinked back on, the path ahead was empty except for a black fedora lying crowned down in the frost. Miller left it where it fell. Back in town, Linda Huey attempted something like normal life. She returned to her shift at the garment factory, fingers threading bobbins. yet every hiss of steam made her flinch. Break room chatter orbited the creature, its wings now rumored to span 15, then 20 feet. A co-worker joked that Linda should write to True magazine. Linda managed a fragile laugh, but inside she pictured those eyes and felt nothing humorous survive. That evening she visited Reverend McDaniel seeking solace. The pastor listened as she described dreams of endless bridges collapsing into bottomless rivers. He prayed over her, voice cracking. When she left, McDaniel lingered at the altar, wondering if faith alone could anchor a flock against forces carved from older, darker stories than those bound in leather and gold leaf. 2 nights later, near midnight, the black sedan returned, this time parking beside the Silver Bridge. Jake Ramsey, drawn by dread and some fatal curiosity, watched from the riverbank. He saw 3 dark figures pacing the catwalks, measuring something against girders with thin metal rods that glinted under moonlight. They worked silently, glancing skyward between readings. Jake raised binoculars. None of the men cast a breath plume in the freezing air. When a low thrumming swept across the water, the trio froze, turning their faces toward the sound. Jake's skin prickled. He followed their gaze upward, and there it was, hovering above the bridge apex, the Mothman. Wings outstretched, body rigid as stone, it hung against the stars like an insect pinned by God's own hand. For a moment, time calcified. Jake sensed the river cease flowing, the wind hush mid-gust, the pulse in his throat halt half-beat. Red eyes burned twin holes in the night. The strangers seemed unfazed. One lifted a device, part camera, part Geiger counter, and a seething chorus of clicks erupted. The creature tilted its head as if listening, then unfurled its wings in a slow, deliberate motion. A pressure wave swept down, rippling water, rattling bridge cables. Jake's binoculars rattled against his teeth. When he looked again, the Mothman was gone, vanished into a rent of darkness among winter clouds. The men packed instruments and slid into the sedan. As they drove off, every streetlight on the Ohio side flickered and died for 6 seconds, long enough for Jake to count the beats of his racing heart. Morning brought frost so heavy it silvered every branch, yet townsfolk reported clocks losing precisely 13 minutes overnight. Televisions refused to power on until midday. Postmaster Helen Browning discovered entire sacks of mail magnetized, stamps glued to each other by invisible charge. And on the town's only payphone, a humming vibration made coins dance inside the return slot. Mary Heyer, undeterred, telephoned New York journalist John Keel, whose articles on anomalous phenomena fascinated her. Keel arrived within 48 hours, trenchcoat flapping like a banner against December gales. He interviewed witnesses, filled tape reels with trembling voices, and spent dawns roaming abandoned quarries where locals swore the creature nested. Keel theorized that Point Pleasant had slipped into a window area, a thin place between realities where entities wandered through cracks. He noted the men in black, the clock errors, the electromagnetic surges. But his notebook's margins held questions he didn't dare ask aloud. Why here? Why now? One evening, Keel joined Mary at the register office. The building groaned under river wind while they compared timelines. Red pushpins dotted Mary's map like spilled blood. She traced a circle connecting initial sightings to riverbanks and finally to the Silver Bridge. Sunrise bled across her desk as Keel whispered, "If there's a pattern, we have weeks, maybe days, before something breaks." His finger tapped the pin stuck in the bridge. Mary's stomach churned. She thought of cables humming like violin strings under unseen tension. Out in the county, cattle mutilations began. No blood, no prints, just precise incisions and organs removed as neatly as parts from a watch. Sheriff's deputies photographed unfathomably clean cuts, flesh cauterized though no heat source touched it. A veterinarian swore the tissue edges looked as if light itself was a scalpel. Panic metastasized. Some families fled to relatives across state lines, others surrendered to fatalism, wreathing doors with holly and cedar, determined to celebrate Christmas under any sky. Store shelves emptied of canned goods and flashlights. Church attendance doubled, then tripled, sanctuary air thick with prayers that tasted of iron and river fog. Yet amid dread, curiosity thrived. Amateur ufologists arrived in rusty vans, parking outside the TNT domes with camera rigs and CB radios freshly soldered. They traded stories beside campfires, their laughter brittle. But when the woods fell silent, no owls, no coyotes, they doused flames and locked doors, hearts gasping the same silent question: what force quiets the wilderness? On December 14th, Linda closed her eyes, hoping for dreamless sleep. Instead, she found herself standing atop the silver bridge in moonlight. The structure pulsed beneath her like a steel heartbeat. Far below, the river churned black, speckled with ice flows swirling in lazy eddies. Across the span, she saw the Mothman perched on the far tower, wings folded inward. For the first time, its eyes were not glowing. They were mirrors, reflecting Linda's own face, slick with tears she hadn't felt. The creature lifted a clawed hand, pointing east where dawn would soon slit the horizon. Behind its silhouette, Linda discerned 3 figures in black coats walking toward her, their footsteps silent though they crossed metal grating. One carried a fedora in cold fingers. As they drew closer, Linda felt the bridge vibrate, each rivet groaning in pitch that echoed through her sternum. She tried to scream. The dream shattered into waking, yet her bedroom still trembled. Framed photos rattled, glassware chimed. Across town, others jolted awake, sensing the same subterranean shudder rolling through foundations and nerve endings alike. Seismographs at the State Geologic Survey later noted no quake, but every dog in Mason County barked until sunrise and would not be comforted. Dawn revealed nothing broken, no collapsed mines, no derailed trains. The town exhaled, but the breath steamed with apprehension. For the shiver that passed through Point Pleasant had been a rehearsal move of forces hidden behind the curtain of normalcy. A tuning fork struck by unseen hands to test how much strain steel, stone, and human faith could bear. And somewhere beyond sight, the men in black compared readings, conferring in tones too hushed for winter wind to carry. The Mothman watched them from a decaying water tower, red eyes rekindling, wings rustling like dry leaves about to ignite. Chapter 4. The Night of Falling Stars. The dusk of December 15th arrived wearing a hard, bitter wind that scraped frost from porch rails and carried it in swirling cyclones through the empty streets. A weather bulletin warned of dangerous wind chill, but Point Pleasant citizens had already learned the forecast meant little. It was not barometric pressure that ruled their nights now, but some older barometer measured in static and fear. At 5:30, just as the sun's last embers drained beneath the Ohio River, a silvery streak knifed across the darkening sky, too slow for a meteor, too fluid for a plane. Mary Hire watched from her office window as it curved silently above the courthouse dome, leaving behind a faint, shimmering tail like the afterglow of a struck match. A second streak followed, then a third, each bending in ways that defied the straight geometry of shooting stars. Within minutes, a dozen white-hot trails stitched the firmament, all drifting toward the same point, the abandoned TNT maze. The phenomenon drew townsfolk onto porches despite the cold. Children pointed with mittened hands, fathers cursed under their breath, and elderly women crossed themselves. Certain revelations had begun. Some saw them as comets. Others whispered, ghost lights. Linda Huey, standing on her stoop clutching a mug of cocoa untouched, recognized them for what they were: announcements. Across town, Jake Ramsey gunned the engine of his pickup, trailer hitch clattering as he sped toward the river. Hunting binoculars lay on the passenger seat. The falling light seemed to pull him the way currents draw driftwood. He radioed Deputy Miller. "You see in the sky bleed?" Miller's reply was guttural static, punctuated by a single word: everywhere. At the TNT area, weeds hissed against bunkers as each white coil sank, halting in mid-air 15 feet above the cracked concrete. They hung there, humming faintly, bright enough to bleach the surrounding trees to bone. Then the humming deepened, a basso vibration that rattled loose cinder blocks and sent squirrels fleeing in frantic spirals. The orbs pulsed in sync, strobing like heartbeats. Roger Lanier was the first officer on scene. He stepped from his cruiser, teeth aching from the subsonic rumble that seemed to vibrate inside his skull. He lifted a maglite, but its beam vanished the moment it touched the nearest orb, swallowed whole as if light met light and cancelled itself. Through watering eyes he saw the bunker, cofferdams tremble, flakes of ancient paint swirling off like ash. Suddenly the orbs collapsed inward, shrinking to pinpoints that flashed scarlet, then winked out. In their place hung silence, true silence, a vacuum that devoured cricket chirps and wind alike. Lanier exhaled and heard nothing. Panic clawed his throat. He turned to call for backup, but his radio screen was black, his voice recorder dead, batteries drained instantaneously. 50 yards away, hidden by brambles, a pair of men in black watched through dark goggles. One spoke softly into a device no larger than a pen. It emitted a muted trill, and the goggles flickered with glyphs. The taller man nodded once and slipped something the size of a chess piece into an inner pocket, a crystalline shard still glowing with internal embers. They withdrew without a sound, melting into the tree line before Lanier's ears recovered. Back in town, the sky was far from quiet. The meteor-mimicking trails had multiplied, drawing luminous webs over rooftops. Power transformers popped like overripe berries. Blue sparks rained onto snow-dusted sidewalks. Traffic lights blinked in a rhythmic sequence, green, green, both directions, and pickups skidded through intersections. The town plunged toward chaos, lit only by the unnatural canopy overhead. Reverend McDaniel dashed from house to house, gathering families into the church basement. Candles lined the walls, fluttering in the draft. He opened his worn Bible but found himself reciting verses from memory. The printed words seemed to crawl, letters trading places on the page whenever his gaze drifted. Some congregants wept quietly, convinced the shifting text was God's message of impending judgment. Others stared at the ceiling, flinching whenever timbers creaked, expecting wings to tear through the roof. Mary Heyer, notebook clutched to her chest, roamed Main Street amid the confusion. Lightning-bright filaments still scored the heavens, converging again and again above the distant munitions field. She photographed each sweep, camera flash feeble beside the cosmic pyrotechnics. A boy no older than 10 tugged her coat, eyes wide. "Miss," he whispered, "they're making a map." She followed his pointing finger and realized the streaks formed a vast sigil, an angular pattern repeating itself, drawn on the world's largest chalkboard. The thought sent a chill marrow deep. Maps are drawn for travelers who already know where they're going. At 9:04 p.m., every siren in Mason County wailed spontaneously. Fire, tornado, civil defense. The triple-tone lament rose as one voice and then cut mid-howl. For 9 seconds, a suffocating quiet pressed upon the valley. People claimed later that their bones vibrated, that they felt as if submerged under miles of water. Pets cowered, birds hammered their cage doors until beaks bled. Meanwhile, inside the TNT labyrinth, Lanier saw the ground itself glow, a dull red-orange breath seeping from cracks between slabs. Something beneath was heating the earth like coals kindled beneath a forge. He backed away, boot soles crunching ice. A shadow detached from the roofline of an igloo. The Mothman descended, not swooping, but dropping with rigid wings, as if weightless until the last instant. It landed before him, talons scraping sparks from concrete. For a moment Lanier's mind blanked, unable to parse the enormity of wing curvature, the alien texture of its hide. The eyes, cyclone centers of color, rotating from crimson to molten gold, fixed on him. The deputy raised his frozen maglite, feeble shield. He met the gaze and felt his memories peel open. Childhood fevers, his father's funeral, the moment he first kissed his wife on a hillside strewn with fireflies. All of it flashed by in a strobing montage no mortal could curate. The creature extended one clawed finger, touching the maglite's lens. The bulb imploded, showering Lanier's hand with glass dust. Then the Mothman snapped its wings and lifted, disappearing in a single vault straight upward, breaking through the bare branches without rustling a twig. Lanier stumbled to his cruiser, hands trembling so violently the keys slipped twice. When the engine turned, the dashboard clock spun backward, numbers flickering. It finally froze, blinking 12 zeros. He sped toward town, tires hissing on frost-slick asphalt, unaware of the tattered black fedora now resting on the passenger seat. Downtown, Linda stood beside the bridge plaza watching lights swirl above like a carousel of dying stars. The steel trusses moaned, minute oscillations shivering through the massive structure. She placed a palm against a support beam and felt it beat like diseased flesh. Somewhere in that metallic pulse was a countdown, she knew, though to what she dared not say. Jake Ramsey arrived, panting, binocular strap flapping against his chest. He whispered that the orbs in the TNT area had left scorches in perfect concentric rings, melted snow yet unspattered by steam. He mentioned faceless men pocketing pieces of the sky. Linda's eyes widened. She described her own vision of the figures on the bridge. Their stories dovetailed like matching halves of a cryptic emblem, confirming what each feared alone, that Point Pleasant had become stage, audience, and prop for forces rehearsing catastrophe. Electricity finally died street by street, plunging town blocks into blackout. Only the wheeling ghost lights overhead remained, painting pale silhouettes of gables and chimneys across slick pavement. For hours the lights whirled, then tapered, then winked out, leaving nothing but clouds smudged with residual glow. One by one, generators coughed to life. Flashlights sliced the void. Parents counted children. Pastors recited psalms. Deputies recorded damages. Amazingly, no one lay dead, no building burned, not a single window cracked. Yet everyone felt as if a siege had been fought and barely survived. Lanterns trembled in shaking hands. The smell of ozone clung to wool coats and hair. Before dawn broke, Mary Heyer clicked through the final frame of film in her camera and realized the sky's show had erased every star. The familiar constellations were gone, replaced by a flat, grim canvas. When the sun lifted, weak and anemic, the stars failed to reappear even in its retreat. Astronomers, as far as Charleston later confirmed, for 12 hours telescopes registered no celestial bodies above Mason County, as though a curtain had been drawn between Earth and cosmos. Power returned. Radios crackled and came alive, but every frequency played the same message, repeated in a calm, emotionless male voice. Stand by for correction. The phrase looped exactly 27 times. Then normal programming resumed mid-song, disc jockey unaware of any interruption. In the TNT field, investigators found fuse boxes fused shut, metal warped, as if by extreme magnetism. Where orbs had hovered, Geiger counters hissed softly. Footprints encircled one scorch mark. Men's dress shoes, size too small for the deputies on scene, terminating in a neat triangle with no sign of exit. Lanier reported the missing fedora, but could not explain how it entered his locked cruiser. When placed on an evidence shelf at headquarters, the hat unspooled overnight, threads unraveling until only a pile of fine black dust remained. December 16th dawned pale but deceptively calm. Children trudged to school, their breath steaming in air that now tasted faintly of copper. yet hearts carried the weight of the previous night's voiceless proclamation. Point Pleasant had witnessed a storm that rewrote the sky, a cosmic preludium played on invisible instruments. And in the quiet aftermath, the Silver Bridge exhaled a sigh too subtle for human ears, a groan of fatigued rivets and overstressed trusses. Within those iron bones, fractures spread like spider webs, each hairline crack dreaming of the moment it would leap open and sing. Chapter 5. The Bridge That Dreamed of Water. Pre-dawn stillness seldom visits river towns, yet the Ohio lay glass-flat the morning after the Falling Star siege, as if stunned into silence. Fog clung ankle-high along the embankment, swirling around the Silver Bridge's concrete piers like restless souls unable to choose a shore. From her kitchen window, Linda Huey watched gulls wheel above the span, tracing lazy circles that ended abruptly whenever they neared the center truss. Birds wiser than people, she thought, steering clear of what they could not name. Downtown, a tri-county engineering crew set up floodlights and scaffolds beneath the bridge. Mayor Crosby had ordered an urgent inspection after late-night calls from truckers who claimed the roadway bounced like a diving board. Chief Engineer Samuel Kearns, gray mustache, clipboard battle-scarred by decades of federal contracts, expected routine fatigue cracks. He did not expect rivets that squealed when loosened, as if protesting removal. Nor did he expect to lower a borescope into a box beam and find the interior web plates scored with strange, symmetrical grooves. Shallow, parallel cuts running the entire 40-foot length, identical on every beam tested. Too clean for corrosion, too precise for random stress. They reminded Kearns of claw marks left by some colossal steel talon. While workers pored over the discoveries, electricity misbehaved again. Arc welders flickered, their currents sucked away by invisible siphons. Portable radios whined through frequencies until only a low, rhythmic clicking remained. 3 beats, a pause, 3 beats. One welder yanked off his headset, swearing the pattern matched a distress signal he'd once learned in the Navy. Kearns dismissed it as interference, but unease crawled up his spine when the clicking timed perfectly with each gust of wind rattling the catwalk. Observing from the riverbank, John Keel snapped photos, documenting every jitter of cable and warp of crossbrace. Mary Hire stood beside him, scribbling descriptions so vivid her notebook pages looked bruised by ink. They spoke little, aware too much conjecture might shatter the fragile boundary between investigation and hysteria. But both felt the bridge was more than infrastructure now. It was a barometer measuring an oncoming storm that no weather report would warn. That evening, Reverend McDaniel hosted another prayer vigil inside his church. Parishioners lit taper candles that cast trembling halos on arched plaster, but the lights kept guttering, snuffed by drafts no one could trace. The pastor read Psalm 46. Though the mountains quake, we will not fear. Yet his voice wavered when the sanctuary's stained glass dove pulsed with a crimson glow, as if backlit by hidden lightning. Some blamed headlights outside, others silently recalled eyes they'd rather forget. At the TNT site, Deputy Miller and Officer Lanier resumed patrol under orders they privately deemed futile. The bunkers felt emptier than before, cleared of any echo. Yet a new scent hovered, ozone mingled with scorched cedar, like air after a lightning strike in a sawmill. On a whim, Lanier aimed his flashlight at Bunker 22's wall. Metallic flakes embedded in the concrete glittered silver blue, forming a pattern like frost, but warm to the touch. His pocket compass spun until its needle balanced not on north, but on the pattern's center. Miller, stomach knotting, proposed they leave markers for a state forensics team. Lanier agreed, yet when they returned to the cruiser, every can of spray paint stowed in the trunk had burst. No propellant hissed out. The cans looked wrung empty by invisible fingers, sides folded inward. Car doors slammed shut of their own accord as both men stood shaking in the moonlight. The next afternoon, school buses crossing the bridge reported dashboard needles twitching. Children felt hair rise on forearms, balloons clung to vinyl seats without friction. At 3:17 p.m., every wristwatch on board stopped. The instant the bus rolled off the span, the second hands jumped forward, as though time had skipped a breath, and then sprinted to catch up. Jake Ramsey convened a meeting of river pilots in the back room of Dockside Tavern. Men who prided themselves on bravado nursed whiskies, whispering of sonar pings returning hollow voids beneath Pier 3, voids where bedrock should be. One pilot claimed his depth finder screamed and died when the Mothman streaked overhead, its wingtips shedding sparks that fizzled into the river like dying fireflies. No one laughed at him. Night fell with neither stars nor aurora, only a pewter dome sagging low. Linda sat on her porch, journal open on her lap, trying to pin fear to paper. She wrote of dreams, the bridge swaying like a cradle, red eyes replacing navigation lights, black-coated silhouettes marching single file along the main cable toward a vanishing point taped over the future. Each word felt insufficient, like sketching a hurricane with a dull pencil. Just past midnight, a low groan rippled through the town, a deep metallic moan that seemed to issue from underground. Windows rattled, street signs jittered on their poles. Dogs answered with a chorus of alarm. The sound rumbled for 13 seconds, then ceased. All who heard it swore it came from the heart of the bridge. Kearns, already sleepless, threw on a parka and sped to the site. Headlamps carved twin tunnels across frosted asphalt. He parked beside lane markers that fluttered in windless air. Stepping onto the steel deck, he felt vibrations through his boots, weak but steady, like distant engines through floorboards. He leaned over the guardrail. The river glowed faintly. At first he suspected moonlight, but when he looked up, clouds blanketed the sky. The glow came from below, pale bands spiraling in the current directly beneath the center span, circling as if stirred by an unseen drill. Suddenly the pattern shifted. The luminous bands tightened, rising in a column of mist that coalesced into a ring 10 feet wide hovering above the water. Inside that ring, darkness writhed, swallowing reflection. Kearns backed away, breath pluming. The metal deck vibrated harder, syncopating with his pulse. He imagined every bolt remembering the torque of construction, every beam recalling the day it first felt weight. He realized the bridge was alive in the worst possible way, awake to its own impending failure. From the far tower came a flutter of wings. Kearns glimpsed the silhouette, impossible to miss against even that starless sky. The Mothman perched, eyes dimmed to embers, watching the glowing vortex. It spread its wings slowly, as if conducting an orchestra no mortal could hear. Then came footsteps, soft, deliberate, behind Kearns. He spun to see 3 men in black approaching, coats rippling though no wind blew. One lifted a palm, stop. Another produced a rod topped with a crystal flickering like trapped lightning. The third knelt, placing a black box on the steel grate. It unfolded silently into a tripod, pointing at the vortex. Kearns choked out a demand. "Who are you? What is this?" But his voice fled downriver without echo. The tallest man turned. Beneath the brim of his hat, his eyes glowed a pale, indifferent silver. He touched one finger to his lips. All 3 looked past Kearns toward the Mothman. The creature answered by tilting its head, wings giving a single downward pulse that rattled the entire span. Something inside the box clicked. A beam of cold violet light shot forth, bathing the vortex. The luminous water funnel convulsed, bands unraveling into whip-fast spirals that lashed at the air, flinging droplets that hissed like acid wherever they struck the deck. Steam rose in twisting sheets. Kearns staggered back, shielding his eyes. The men in black watched, unblinking. The vortex narrowed, shrieked. He could hear it now, a keening like metal bent beyond its tolerance, then collapsed with a thunderclap that blew mist across the river in a scalding wave. The bridge trembled, steel quivering as if struggling to remember solidity. The box snapped shut. The crystal dimmed. Without word or glance, the three men packed their device and walked into darkness, melting into curtains of fog. The Mothman abandoned its perch, diving into the smoke where the vortex had been. It vanished below the deck without splash, swallowed by shadows that looked thicker than water. Kearns sank to his knees, palms pressed to steel still vibrating like struck bell metal. Somewhere deep within the lattice, something cracked, small, sharp, the sound of enamel fracturing under pressure. Sirens never sounded. Kearns staggered back to his truck at dawn. He filed no report, convinced no human bureaucracy could process what he had witnessed. Yet a change settled over Point Pleasant that day. A collective hush, as if the entire valley drew a single breath it had no intention of releasing until some unspeakable verdict arrived. That verdict whispered first through children at recess, claiming they could feel the ground move, like the earth breathing through rubber soles. It seeped into senior center chatter, old men admitting their pacemakers ticked erratically whenever they drove under the bridge. And it crept into Mary Hire's dreams, where she stood on the span with her reporter's pad, only for every scribbled line to bleed into a single shaky sentence. Not long now, not long now. Temperatures plunged. Ice sheathed the riverbanks, framing the bridge's reflection in fractured glass. Each dawn the sun seemed to hang lower, reluctant to climb. December 17th would arrive in 24 hours, though few bothered marking calendars anymore. Time itself had become suspect. Clocks skipping, watches spinning, nights stretching or snapping short with no regard for astronomical truth. Yet amid that temporal tangle, an invisible countdown advanced, steady, inevitable. And the Mothman, whether harbinger, sentinel, or executioner, circled unseen above the frost fog valley, wings beating a rhythm older than steel, older than human dread, calling the river to prepare its cold embrace. Chapter 6. The day the river opened its mouth. Steel-gray dawn seeped over the Ohio River on December 17th like bruised light through dirty gauze. Frost feathered every branch, hushed even the caw of early crows. Yet an undercurrent of vibration, too low for ears, too sure for nerves to ignore, ran through Point Pleasant's bones. It woke dogs in unison, shuddered coffee spoons against diner mugs, and made the Silver Bridge whisper all day long with a faint, metallic tinnitus. Linda Huey felt it first in her teeth. Brushing that morning, she thought a filling had cracked, until the mirror's medicine cabinet door trembled on its hinge. She swallowed alarm, telling herself wind rattled the house. But the air outside was still, so still the American flag atop Town Hall drooped like wet cloth. At 11:30, engineer Samuel Kearns gathered his reports and walked City Hall corridors that seemed too quiet for a workday. He'd spent the night tallying anomalies, L-beam grooves, compass drift, unexplained magnetization. When he stepped into Mayor Crosby's office, the mayor was already pacing, tie hanging off one collar. Crosby blurted questions. Was the bridge safe? Could it remain open through Christmas traffic? But Kearns heard only an echo of rivets popping in his head, the memory of that spectral vortex. He recommended full closure pending federal inspection. Crosby's lips tightened, closing the artery 2 weeks before the holiday would choke commerce, strand families. He asked for 24 hours. Kearns, hollow-eyed, nodded once, and felt he'd just signed an oath of complicity. Meanwhile, Mary Hire typed furiously, feeding ribbon into her battered royal. Each keystroke resounded like hail on a tin roof. She titled the piece, "Is Our Bridge Whispering a Warning?" Before she could finish, the power flicked off. When lights returned, the typed page read only a single sentence repeated down its length. "Look to the water, look to the water, look to the water." Mary tore it free, shivers marching her spine. Out on Route 35, a convoy of tractor-trailers crept toward town. The lead driver, Earl Switchblade Carter, noted that his CB fell silent the instant the Silver Bridge came into view. No chatter, no music beds, just a hiss and a soft, unnatural clicking. 3 beats, a pause, 3 beats. Earl shut the set off, uneasy. At 2:10 p.m., school let out early. Children piled into buses, chattering about homemade ornaments and snow day hopes. Driver Nancy Kincaid checked her wristwatch. It had stopped. She shrugged, started the engine, and lined up behind a procession headed for the bridge. On the river, Jake Ramsey nudged his skiff through patchy ice floes, eyes on Pier 3 where sonar voids had petrified him. The water was unnaturally glassy, reflecting sky like a gunmetal mirror. Through binoculars, he saw something hover near the top chord of the bridge, a dark knot, half bird, half shadow. Mothman. Wings tucked close, head bowed as if in listening prayer. Jake felt the world narrow to the creature's slow inhale. 2:24 p.m. Traffic stacked bumper to bumper across the span, cars, buses, semis, all idling on steel older than most drivers. Beneath them, a single link eye-bar, corroded beyond design, flexed fractionally with every ton that rolled its way. Inside the matrix of beams, hairline cracks raced each other like lightning filaments under painted skin. Linda's car crawled forward in the westbound lane. She drummed fingers on the wheel, glancing at the river flashing dull silver between trusses. Her radio emitted a sudden, harsh burst. "Stand by for correction," then died. She flicked it off. The steering column vibrated stronger than engine idle should allow. High above, Mothman rose from the cord, wings unfurling to full span. A hush fell so absolute that even exhaust pipes ceased rattling. Dozens of motorists looked up simultaneously, windows fogging with anxious breath. In those eyes, Linda saw mirrored her own dread. The sense that every second of the past year had marched them to this exact inch of roadway. Then came the sound. It was not thunder, though it rolled. Not gunfire, though it cracked. It was steel surrendering, a clang that rang through marrow, followed by a deep groan as if the bridge exhaled centuries of strain. The eye-bar snapped. A domino of failure rippled across sway braces. The roadway buckled, dipped, then hinged downward like a drawbridge to hell. Linda's seatbelt wrenched her chest as the car pitched. Ahead, the school bus lurched sideways. Children screamed, small hands slapping windows, tractor-trailers jackknifed, weight slamming the buckling deck. Earl Carter jammed his brake, but gravity had already taken command. His rig slid nose down toward the river yawning beneath torn asphalt. From the shoreline, Mary Hire froze, notebook limp at her side, as half the span folded upon itself, silver arcs of cabling whipping free like frayed nerves. Concrete piers fractured, sections of roadway cascaded into the Ohio with thunderous splashes, sending geysers 10 stories high. She thought of the typed warning, "Look to the water." Now the water looked back, roiling, hungry, closing over twisted metal. Jake's skiff rocked violently. He lashed the tiller, eyes stinging with wind blown from falling debris. Through spray, he saw cars plunge, bubbles boiling up like soul-filled balloons bursting. Among them, one shape darted, not diving but flying. The Mothman swept low along the collapsing girders, wings beating through clouds of rust, eyes flaring molten red. It seemed to trace the path of destruction with surgical precision, touching nothing, yet mapping everything. On the remaining intact eastern lane, horns blared, drivers reversed frantically even as the deck listed. Nancy Kincaid fought the bus wheel. Children huddled in aisle seats, crying. A cable whistled overhead and sliced the roof like a giant scythe, shredding metal and daylight. Nancy flung the doors open, yelling for kids to jump. Many tumbled out and sprinted toward land. Others stayed frozen, the bus nose tilted, tires screeching across steel. Linda's car teetered on the brink of the severed joint. She saw water far below churn with oil slicks and floating Christmas gifts flung from trunks. Reflex shoved her door open. Cold air slapped her lungs. She scrambled onto the listing lane, shoes sliding on iced steel. A woman nearby clutched an infant, unable to move. Linda grasped her elbow, hauling both toward the trembling anchor span. Behind them, the west tower groaned like a dying animal. Bolts shot free, pinging across deck plates. Linda turned in time to see the second half of the bridge shudder, tilt, and let go. The bus shrieked downward, yellow frame cartwheeling toward the river where it struck with a muffled boom. Steam billowed. Linda's throat ripped a scream she'd never forget. For 67 harrowing seconds, the silver bridge came apart. Every ton of concrete and cable meeting the river's iron-cold embrace. When the final segment vanished, silence slammed shut. Profound. Awful. Snowflakes spiraled down, hissing against hot shards of metal cooling on the shore. Linda collapsed to her knees on solid ground, heart thrashing like trapped bird wings. Survivors milled about, some soaked, some bleeding, eyes wide with shock's blank mercy. Sirens in town ignited into banshee chorus. Yet through the cacophony, Linda heard wings, slow, powerful beats above. She looked up. Mothman hovered mid-air where the bridge had stood, body silhouetted against bruised sky. It regarded the ruin, head tilting left to right slowly, like a curator appraising finished art. Then, with one deliberate sweep, it turned and glided south, dissolving into the low clouds. Emergency crews converged, firefighters, state troopers, National Guard. Boats braved shifting debris, dragging hooked lines across the current. Spotlights panned the dark water. They recovered twisted cars, Christmas parcels bobbing like bright corpses, and bodies tangled in seatbelts. 46 souls lost. Mary Hire stood by the command tent, tears freezing on her cheeks as she jotted numbers she prayed were wrong. At dusk, men in black reappeared. 2 walked the muddy shoreline, unmuddied shoes somehow avoiding mire. 1 knelt, dipped a slender probe into river foam swirling over a submerged cable. He withdrew it. The tip glowed faint violet. The other man recorded readings on a slate that shimmered with unread glyphs. When a National Guardsman approached, they melted away behind ambulance lights, leaving only boot prints that filled with icy water, and vanished minutes later. John Keel arrived at first light. Surveying wreckage, he whispered that prophecies often hide in plain sight until hindsight renders them obvious. Point Pleasant hadn't been haunted. It had been forewarned. The vision in red eyes, the bizarre orbs, the clicking radios, the stilled stars, all preludes to the river's appetite. Reverend McDaniel held vigil at the high school gym where survivors huddled. He offered blankets, scripture, silence. At midnight he stepped outside, unable to breathe the grief-thick air. Snow whispered across the parking lot. Looking skyward, he saw no stars, only one black shape circling far above, larger than any bird could be, wings glinting in moon-frosted arcs. He did not feel malice, only a terrible, mournful gravity. He bowed his head, unsure whether to pray for the town or for the creature that seemed bound to its sorrow. In the days that followed, divers retrieved bodies, welders cut twisted steel, and the river resumed its indifferent flow. Newspapers nationwide splashed headlines about structural failure, poor maintenance, overloaded holiday traffic. They did not mention red eyes or falling stars. Federal engineers cited metal fatigue. Insurance adjusters cited act of God. Point Pleasant citizens cited both, then fell silent, each harboring images that would outlast official reports. Some claimed the Mothman left with the bridge, no further sightings, no static on radios. Yet Linda sometimes woke before dawn, heart racing. Certain wings brushed her roof like branches in windless air. Jake Ramsey relocated upriver, but on clear nights, the lights of Point Pleasant reflected in his binoculars, and amidst them, he swore he saw a single crimson spark roaming the dark. Mary Hyre published her article on Christmas Eve. The headline, "Eyes in the Shadow, Did We Ignore the Last Warning?" It ran alongside names of the lost, a map of the collapsed span, and a photograph of wreaths tied to the river fence. Some readers called her sensational, others mailed letters thanking her for giving voice to what officialdom refused. The mayor never forgave her, but Mary felt the press owed truth to those who had stared prophecy in the face and still crossed the bridge. As winter hardened into January, families gathered on the new makeshift ferry to place flowers on the water. Each blossom spun slowly in the current, drifting toward the open mouth of the Ohio, where lights from the munitions site still flickered some nights, though power had long been cut. And though no witness could prove it, legend insists that for months after the collapse, every time mist settled 2 feet above the river, an echoing metallic flap rippled through the fog, wings beating once, twice, then gone, reminding Point Pleasant that omens never leave, they only learn to whisper. Chapter 7. Aftermath of Silence. Snow muffled Point Pleasant for weeks after the bridge's demise, wrapping streets and memories in the same dim hush that follows funerals too large for any one church to contain. Plows scraped avenues at dawn, but the river's roar seemed louder in the hollows left behind. Where laughter once drifted from the Moose Lodge, quiet presided, broken only by the crunch of winter boots and the low murmur of survivors trading haunted glances. Linda Huey moved through those days like a reluctant actor on a stage whose scenery had collapsed mid-performance. She woke before sunrise, brewed coffee she rarely drank, and walked the length of Main Street with her collar pulled high. Storefronts still dressed for Christmas, paper angels, silver bells, tinseled boughs. But behind the glass, merchants restocked shelves in slow motion, uncertain who would shop under such a shadow. At the river fence, Linda paused each morning to watch the water flow past the twisted scaffold where the bridge once connected 2 states, 2 halves of her life. Plastic flowers shivered in wind gusts, their bright hues refusing to fade, though grief had already leached color from everything else. She kept seeing faces, the woman whose infant she'd wrested from that tipping sedan, the child she had not reached on the bus before it plunged. The mayor, now hollow-eyed, signing condolence letters till his pen ran dry. Sometimes, stepping out of the post office, she'd think she saw the Mothman's shadow sweep across the snow, and she'd freeze, heart lurching, only to find a low-flying crow tracing the river. Yet the dread never left. It perched just behind her shoulder, invisible, breathing ice across her neck at unpredictable moments. The National Transportation Safety Board arrived with clipboards, camera crews, and a script. Metal fatigue in the eye bar, corrosion hidden by decades of paint, load stress from holiday traffic. In press briefings, they spoke of math, ESI, stress ratios, temperature variances. Reporters dutifully typed figures. But when they paused for questions, Mary Hyre's hand rose, eyes shaded with exhaustion and defiance. "What of the electromagnetic anomalies days prior?" she asked. "The lights in the TNT area, the sightings above the bridge?" The lead investigator frowned politely, replied those were local legends with no bearing on structural failure. Cameras moved on. Mary's notebook, however, filled with new margins of restless ink. John Keel drifted between motels, too unsettled to sleep more than an hour at a stretch. Every night he sat outside beneath sodium street lamps, replaying tape reels of townsfolk. Static, clicks, a voice repeating correction. He slowed the tape to half speed, then a quarter. The phrase morphed into a buried rhythm that spelled nothing in English but made his skin crawl. He mailed packages of evidence to colleagues in New York. A week later, 2 boxes returned unopened, stamped "address unknown" in ink that glimmered faintly even in dark closets. The men in black were gone, or perhaps merely hidden. State troopers never found their sedan, though tire tracks led from the inspection site to a snow-dusted service road and simply ceased, as if the vehicle had dissolved into thin mountain air. Deputies joked about teleportation until one discovered his patrol car radio now hummed that same 3-click pattern whenever he drove within a mile of the TNT domes. He turned in a resignation letter the next day, claiming his pacemaker skipped beats in sync with the clicks. Reverend McDaniel organized evening services in the high school gym, the only space large enough for a town's collective grief. Families filed in under fluorescent glare, survivors clutching hands as if they might float away. The pastor read Psalm 91, voice vibrating through the bleachers. "He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge." Linda flinched at the word wings, but she stayed because leaving felt like surrendering whatever hope the verse still offered. When the benediction ended, congregants lingered in clusters, retelling the moment the world came loose beneath their tires, each version identical yet isolated, like facets of the same shattered mirror. Night after night, the town dreamed of water. Children awoke drenched in sweat, convinced they heard bus wheels spinning beneath currents. Older residents heard metal creaking in their walls. One widow swore she saw her late husband's reflection in the river, standing on a bridge that no longer existed, beckoning with arms stiff as rebar. Rumors rose. Some said the Mothman remained, mournfully circling the site. Others insisted it had been banished by the collapse, purpose fulfilled. Desperate for meaning, folks pinned lost and found posters on telephone poles asking for sightings, as if hoping to confront portent with pitchforks, or maybe simply to demand an apology from the sky. Yet not every echo of tragedy was spectral. Bills piled on desks, funeral expenses, medical fees, freight contracts undone by the missing artery, detours adding hours to every route. Grocery deliveries fell behind, produce wilted, factories trimmed shifts. The collapse had ripped a hole not just in steel but in the fragile weave keeping Point Pleasant afloat. Silence was not merely mourning, it was the pause before a community either claws upward or is swallowed whole. Linda visited the river daily until one afternoon an elderly stranger leaned on the rail beside her. He wore a battered felt hat that reminded her, uncomfortably, of those vanishing men. His voice carried no accent she recognized. "Some wounds," he said gently, "bleed inside the earth. The river is carrying more than water away from here." She eyed him warily, but his gaze held no silver, no hidden flames, just infinite fatigue. He produced a small, polished stone streaked with iridescent veins and placed it in her palm. "Keep this," he whispered. "When the sky sings again, listen more than you look." Before she could respond, he walked the towpath and disappeared beneath the branches of sycamores drooping over the bank. When Linda examined the stone later under lamplight, it seemed to throb faintly, as if holding an echo of distant turbines or beating wings. She tucked it in a jewelry box, uncertain whether she had received a gift, a warning, or both. Weather forecast snow for New Year's Eve. Road crews cleared the detour routes, yet folks muttered they'd rather cross 1,000 miles of black ice than brave that detour after dark. Too many stories of headlights blinking out, of radios looping phrases backward, of deer turning circles in the road like compasses gone mad. UPS shipments sat undelivered, their barcodes suddenly unreadable by laser scanners. Elevators in the courthouse reversed direction between floors. Clocks at the elementary school, brand new replacements donated after the collapse, gained 13 minutes every midnight. In the editorial room, Mary Heyer wrote late into each night, determined to capture details before memory buckled under official narratives. She searched county archives, stunned to find a 1907 report of a winged devil harassing ferry travelers weeks before a wooden truss gave way downstream. The article referenced even earlier Shawnee legends of a river spirit whose red eyes heralded great shakings of wood and stone. Mary penned it into her series, concluding, "Omen or agent, the apparition comes not to harm us, but to reveal how much harm we have already prepared for ourselves." Newspaper syndicates declined to reprint the piece, dismissing it as Gothic sensationalism. Locals clipped it, folded it into family Bibles, and underlined names of the dead. In February, divers raised the final twisted panel from the river. Welders cut it apart on the shore under tarped floodlights. When the torches touched steel, each flame bent outward momentarily, as though repelled by an unseen field. Sparks showered but extinguished mid-air. A foreman cursed the wind, though the air was calm, and ordered acetylene pressures checked. Instruments read normal. The welders kept cutting, chilled by a feeling they were dismantling a tombstone that preferred to remain whole. With spring thaw came flood warnings, and yet the river remained uncharacteristically low, as if it too grieved, its surface sinking beneath invisible weight. Grass reclaimed the worksite. Highway crews hammered pylons for a temporary ferry dock. Each blow echoed like a heartbeat across water made shy. Linda watched from a distance, clutching that strange stone in her coat pocket. She noticed gulls had returned, their circles broader, no longer avoiding the center channel. She wondered if that meant it was safe, or if birds simply forget quicker than people. One afternoon, as Mary closed her office blinds, a call came from Charleston. A scientist analyzing bridge debris reported abnormal crystalline deposits, aligning along magnetic lines unseen in ordinary alloys. The line crackled, then dropped. Mary dialed back. The lab receptionist claimed no such sample existed, no such scientist employed. That night, Mary drove home, uneasy, headlights tunneling through mist, and glimpsed a black sedan idling beside the courthouse before it melted into shadow. Rumor said the government issued hush payments to several witness families. Rumor said the payments never arrived. Rumor said a few survivors dreamed the city rebuilt the bridge, painted white, but every morning they found the river empty and themselves weeping for a life that never returned. By Easter, Reverend McDaniel held sunrise service on the riverfront, choir bundled in scarves. As they sang "Up from the Grave He Arose," Linda felt the vibration again, faint, steady, as if chords deep underground hummed in response to human voices. She pressed fingers to the stone in her pocket. It pulsed back. Overhead clouds parted, and for one fragile moment sunlight spilled onto the water like forgiveness. The congregation gasped. For the briefest instant, they swore the bridge shimmered there in reflection, whole, arching heavenward. Then ripples shattered the illusion. Grief began to metamorphose into memory, but memory retained fangs. Parents warned children not to play near the TNT domes. Teenagers went anyway, returning pale and jittery, swearing they heard turbine-sized wings stirring night air. Stores reopened, yet at dusk proprietors locked doors early, leaving side streets to sag between lamplight cones like empty aisles in an abandoned church. For all the seminars engineers hosted, for all the reassurance politicians offered, Point Pleasant understood in Marrow that some fractures begin inside stories long before they split steel, that warnings seldom sound like fire alarms. They whisper through radios, they flicker in the sky, they perch on rooftops with patient, rueful eyes. And if such omens wander into human sight, it is often because the final chapter is already drafted, waiting only for the date and hour to be read aloud. Yet the town endured. Flowers bloomed over unmarked ground where rescue barges had moored. Children laughed again, though some laughter broke mid-peal, stuttered, and resumed like a record scratched but playable. People held each other closer at river festivals, danced slower, looked up more often when crossing new bridges elsewhere. They taught themselves to listen for wings in silence, to weigh the cost of ignoring a shiver down the spine. And on certain moonless nights, when fog lay heavy and radios refused to stay silent, a few claimed they saw a dark figure alight on the rusted water tower, eyes dim, a sentry perhaps, keeping vigil over the wound it once foretold. Most dismissed the tales as trauma's echo. Linda, standing alone at the fence, felt neither terror nor comfort, only reverence. She lifted the stone, now faintly luminous, and whispered into wind that smelled of thawing earth. "I'm listening." Somewhere, far beyond the limits of sight, a single wingbeat answered, low as thunder receding across the hills. Chapter 8. Echoes over the river. Spring bled into summer, trading frost-bitten silence for humid cicada song, yet the wound carved by the bridge collapse never quite scabbed. Point Pleasant inhaled, exhaled, and learned to live with a phantom ache, much like a healed bone that still predicts thunderstorms. Tourists arrived to photograph debris memorials. Folklorists interviewed locals inside neon-lit diners. Engineers stayed long enough to start a new span of concrete and cable that promised it would never rust, never tire, never dream. But every promise clanged hollow against memory's cold iron. The new span rises. Construction pylons stab the riverbed by May. Spotlights turn night into a harsh noon that woke fish from their dark currents. Residents lining the bank told themselves the glare meant progress, yet many kept curtains drawn. The clang of steel rang down Main Street like church bells, calling to a service no one wanted to attend. Linda Huey watched the skeletal towers grow tall, day after day, from her desk at the garment factory. Lunch breaks found her on the roof, squinting through sowing oil haze at cranes threading girders high above. Often she fingered the iridescent stone tucked near her heart. Sometimes it felt cool as river ice. Other days it pulsed warm, as though absorbing distant tremors the human ear still could not hear. Mary's last lead. By midsummer, Mary Heyer had collected 3 binders thick with clippings, affidavits, and hand-drawn maps. One evening she received an unmarked envelope containing only a photograph. A blurry silhouette on the water tower railing, wings partially unfurled, the date stamp reading just 3 nights prior. Scrawled on the back in spidery ink were coordinates, latitude and longitude, pointing to a bend upriver near an abandoned ferry landing. She phoned John Keel, voice tight. "We go tonight." They arrived beneath bruised clouds that swallowed moonlight whole. Their flashlight beams crawled over cracked pavement smothered in cattails. Near the landing, Keel's Geiger counter ticked faintly, rising in pitch the nearer they approached the old warehouse. Inside, dust motes floated like galaxies frozen in amber. In the center of the concrete floor lay a metal box the size of a shoebox, surface etched with angular runes. It glowed soft violet, the same hue Samuel Kearns had described on the night the river opened. Before Keel could photograph, the glow snapped off. A hush unfurled, too complete for the whispering reeds outside. Mary lifted her camera, but the shutter jammed. A chill peeled down her spine. From the rafters above, a single feather drifted, wind-tattered, slate-gray, nearly weightless. It landed across the box. The Geiger counter fell silent. Keel reached forward. Mary seized his wrist. "Some things," she said, "are traps that look like answers." They retreated to the car without touching the gift or bait left behind. Mary filed the coordinates in her binder under a single word. Dangerous. Reverberations. In July, oddities spiked anew. Clocks lost 13 minutes at dawn. Car radios flashed correction in ghost text. School hallway fluorescents flickered crimson whenever lightning stormed across distant counties. Children dared one another to stand alone at the TNT gates. Some returned mute for hours, eyes reflecting static like blank TV screens. Deputy Miller, now resigned, kept his compass locked in a desk drawer, but the needle still swiveled at night as if following invisible footsteps across floorboards. Town council hired psychologists to address collective trauma. Sessions filled church basements where survivors described flavors: metal, ozone, river mud, recurring in dreams. A therapist suggested the community write letters to the lost bridge, then burn them as symbolic release. The exercise drew tears, but when ashes rose on the breeze, many claimed they fluttered upward in the shape of wings before scattering into dusk. A final flight. August heat clung like damp wool when Linda sensed the stone warming to near fever. She stepped onto her porch. Cicadas fell silent. Above the half-finished bridge, the night knitted clouds into a tapestry of bruised purple. Then, there, the figure emerged, gliding beneath starless heights, wingtips grazing the cranes as though signing its name on their stark silhouettes. Red eyes glimmered not with warning now, but with something that felt uncannily like farewell. A sudden wind spiraled, tugging construction tarps into snapping flags. Linda gripped the railing, heart racing. The creature circled 3 times above the new span, once along the western tower, once the eastern, a third tracing the center lane where future traffic would hum. Each pass loosed a shimmer of dust, visible only in lightning that flickered far, far off, dust like dying embers drifting downward, settling on wet primer paint. As quickly as it arrived, the Mothman ascended, wings folding into the storm front until no shape remained, only the fading echo of featherless flight. Thunder rumbled, but no rain fell. Linda pressed the stone to her chest, its heat cooled to steady calm. She whispered a shaky thanks she hoped the wind could carry. Memory sealed in steel. Weeks later, inspectors reported an inexplicable magnetic residue along girders the creature had circled. It posed no structural threat, merely made compass needles jitter if held flush to the beam, another note in the ledger of mysteries. Still, Kearns petitioned to lacquer those sections with a clear sealant for posterity. Crews did so at dawn, brushing resin that glimmered faint violet under rising sun. On the day they set the final deck plate, townsfolk gathered en masse, candles in hand. Reverend McDaniel led a prayer, asking protection for every life that would cross this new bridge, and wisdom to heed warnings written in wind, water, or wing. As the ribbon cut, a breeze swept upriver, strong enough to ripple candles yet gentle on the skin. A few claimed they heard a single distant wing beat riding that gust. Most simply bowed their heads, tears blending with cautious smiles. Mary's article that never ran. 3 nights later, Mary finished a story titled The Ferryman's Shadow, Why Some Warnings Wear Feathers. It traced a line from Shawnee tales through 1907 rumors to modern calamity, arguing, Point Pleasant now lived in a marriage of myth and engineering. Ignore either, and the cost is blood. She mailed copies to 3 national desks, sealed another in her desk safe, and drove home under a sky trembling with quiet stars. By morning, every posting slip returned. Addresses declared undeliverable, though typed true. Only her desk copy remained, but the pages were blank, ink vanished as if never laid. Mary sat, fingers poised above her royal's keys, and laughed, a low, exhausted sound that bordered on sob. She began again, because reporters are caretakers of memory, even when memory erases itself. Legacy carved in quiet. Autumn settled, bringing orange leaves that spiraled onto fresh concrete like celebratory confetti. Traffic rolled once more. Commuters, school buses, truckers wary but grateful. The river glimmered pewter beneath, as though reflecting steel's resolve instead of sky. Yet subtle shifts remained. Nobody crossed at dusk without glancing up. Radios across the valley still hissed 3 clicks whenever storms brewed. And on moonless nights, anglers insisted fish leapt in rings precisely where the eye bar once ruptured, as though drawn to a scar too deep for water alone to hide. Linda kept the iridescent stone on her nightstand. Some evenings it glowed faintly, warming at the exact moment her heart fluttered with a memory she couldn't name. Other times it lay dull, cool, ordinary. A reminder that miracles and warnings often look the same until history chooses labels. John Keel published the Mothman prophecies 2 years later, weaving fact and inference into pages that would outlive him. Skeptics scoffed, believers nodded. Point Pleasant learned to live with strangers photographing murals of a red-eyed silhouette atop gift shop t-shirts. The town's grief capitalism felt uneasy but necessary. Tourism money shored up budgets the bridge wreckage had drained. Some nights, festival bands played by the river, and teenagers danced where twisted beams once bled. In quiet hours, though, when steam rising from manholes looked too much like spectral breath, the townsfolk recalled that omens don't always depart. They sometimes nest in collective consciousness, guiding caution, birthing stories that outlast stone. Like ripples from a single pebble, the echo of wings could travel farther than any creature ever flew. If you ever wander along the Ohio at twilight, whether you stand where a bridge once fell or where a new one now glints, listen. Not just with ears, but with the tremor in your ribs, the tilt of fine hairs on your arm. For warnings seldom repeat themselves in plain words. Sometimes they rustle in treetops, sometimes they stall engines, sometimes they stare from shadows with eyes lit like coals that remember fire. And sometimes, if you honor them with heed instead of mockery, disaster may loosen its grip and drift past like harmless fog. So keep watch. Look to the water. Look to the sky. Notice the silence between radio songs, the extra heartbeat in a bridge's gentle sway. In those margins, wisdom waits, wearing feathers or static, whichever costume we are most likely to see. If this story held your pulse to the last word, if the river's whisper and the wing's echo stirred something cautionary within, share this tale with fellow night travelers. Subscribe for more real horrors that history tried to bury, and keep a light trained on the skies. Because the next warning might be circling already, banking toward your quiet street.